All right, we are back. Dynasty Trades in 5. I'm Clay.
I'm Shane.
I am Scott, and I am the undrafted free agent of this podcast.
Very nice. So we're talking about Austin Ekeler tonight. So he's had a little bit of injury issues here and there lately. Who doesn't, though, when you're talking about running backs? I think he's turning 27 next May. But he scores a lot of freaking fantasy points when he's on the field. So what are we doing with him, Scott?
Well, I think the first thing about Austin Ekeler is he's a veteran running back. So, I mean, take everything we've said in the past videos about any running back that's not like in their second or third year at best to apply to the same thing with Austin Ekeler is he's always going to be a sell if like I can cash out at a high point, or if I can pivot down to somebody else that's a veteran that also is on a second contract, has an injury history. Like you're always looking to make those pivots. But I think we're going to get to an off season where that's going to be hard to do. I don't think people are going to really differentiate between Ekeler versus Henry versus Dalvin Cook, Chubb, Mixon, and enter whatever veteran running back you want to put into that mix. I don't think you're going to see a massive gap between them. So in turn, I think it's going to be very hard to pivot between those players. I think it ultimately comes down to, you look at this year, he's missed one game with COVID last week, but he's still going to end up finishing in the top 3 in the league in targets. So you almost just look and you say, if you were to remove, and I'm just taking this year's numbers, he's actually had better numbers in the past, but if you just remove all of his numbers from what he's done on the ground and you just give him his points that he's secured through the air, you're still talking about a guy that is a low end RB2 just based on his receiving numbers. I mean, he's still going to exceed 10 points per game just based on his reception. So I think that's what you're hoping for. And I think you line him up next to some of these other guys. If you tell me, are you more worried about Austin Ekeler's role maybe transitioning into a more specialized role than you are Dalvin Cook or Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb? Like, they don't really ever have consistency doing that. So when they lose it, whether it's because of injuries or too many touches or whatever, do they lose it quicker? So you do get a little bit of extra value with a guy like Ekeler. Maybe we could make the same argument for McCaffrey. Like, do you get some extra value with him because of that? That's really the only way I can differentiate him and a lot of the other veterans.
He's a hard sell for me. 27 years old. He had 10 rushing touchdowns this year. I don't know how that's possible. You know how many rushing touchdowns he had entering this year? 9. I'm not a big just because, you never did it in your career before, but you never did it in your career before. That's not who you are, you faker. His numbers are inflated off those 10 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, and he has 7 receiving touchdowns. Just dude's had 17 touchdowns. He's a very good player. I think he's closer to the guy we saw in 2020, 16 and a half points a game, than he is the guy we saw this year, 21 points a game. And yeah, problem is as the offseason comes, no one wants to buy him from you because he's a running back that's 27. So you might be better off pivoting and actually just trying to get him for cheap. But again, you're going to have to see. I mean, that's kind of what I have a feeling that we're going to do with a lot of these old running backs when absolutely no one wants to pay anything for them in the offseason.
Would you rather have Austin Ekeler or the 2022 106?
106.
That's tough. I mean, in a vacuum, you'd rather have the pick over the next 6 months just because there's more flexibility with the pick. But I think Ekeler, like Shane said, he's the perfect target with there's probably a dozen names. I kind of want to build a lot of my teams around 1 or 2 of these guys next year, and I want to have a decent amount of all of them. I want to have 3 or 4 shares probably of each one of these running backs that's in this range. I don't want to have too many, but I think there's going to be a point where I'm going to get to the rookie draft and I'm like, oh, I can buy Austin Ekeler for, the 106, 107, 108. I need a running back on this team. It might actually make sense to have him as being the one guy I kind of bank on next year. So that's a good one.
Would you rather have excuse me, Josh Jacobs and the, let's say 110 or Ekeler?
I'm going to take Josh Jacobs in the 110 because I can probably flip Josh Jacobs by himself for the 109 is my hope.
Yeah, I think I'm with Shane. I think I'd rather have the 2 pieces simply because I don't think Jacobs has the ceiling as the guys we've talked about. He's a tier below. But I also think he's the perfect, like if I'm going to build a team with 2 running backs and maybe one be kind of a top 10 guy and one be a top 20 guy, he's the perfect kind of like Robin running back. So I'm basically getting a 2-for-1, and there's a chance I could still buy another running back with that 110. You never know. So I think I'd rather just have the 2 pieces. That's a pretty strong package.
Yep, makes sense. Austin Eckler or Deontay Johnson?
Deontay Johnson.
Ooh.
Sounds
See,
close.
that's where it gets tough. That's where you almost have to look at your roster and say, am I built the way that I want from a construction standpoint? But I would say most of the time, I'd rather lean with the receiver that I think is a top 15 receiver and worry about filling the running back at a cheaper cost later. So yeah, I think there's a shot I could fire a future first or something and get a running back and wait till closer to the season than having to, sell a receiver like Deontay. So I think I can lean with Shane there.
Okay. How about Austin Eckler and the, let's say, 108 or Javonte Williams?
Well, Javante, just because Javante's worth at least the 101 right now, from what I understand. Or was that 2 weeks ago? Things might have calmed down since then.
He's worth the 0.5 right now.
Yeah,
better than a 101.
He's basically going to be a top 4 startup running back next year. So I'm going to take Javante. He won't be on my roster come September, but I'll take him right now.
Yeah, that's tough because, that's going to be Javante's startup price. But I've also kind of found that there's very few people that are willing to actually pay that market price for a running back in terms of what you want. So, like, you're giving me the 108 and Eckler, who maybe I could turn around and flip for the 110 and Josh Jacobs. Like, if you told me I'm getting the 108, 110, and Josh Jacobs, I'd probably be really tempted to sell Javante. So that might be the best offer I can get. So that's an interesting one for sure.